Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of The Bitter Pill. So, today, the bitter pill we're going to talk about is that Israel's a deeply racist, apartheid, Jim Crow like state that's engaged in, and still is engaging in, ethnic cleansing and genocide against the Palestinian people. So, over the 75 years of Israel's existence, millions of people have been expelled from their land, out of Palestine entirely or off of you know, the place they were living in, and hundreds of thousands have been killed. Now, it's certainly true that people on both sides of this conflict have deliberately harmed civilians, and that includes the past 10 days of greatly intensified fighting that's taken place in Palestine. And I hope we can all agree that regardless of who the perpetrator is or who the victim is, targeting innocent civilians in any sort of way that physically harms them is wrong. However, that doesn't negate this context where Israel is the oppressor, colonizing nation, and Palestine is the oppressed nation. And it's important to always bear that in mind. So, sorry. um, I talked when I did a live stream last week, and by the way, sorry for missing last night. I have been trying to do Sundays at 8 every week for a while, and I managed to do it for about 4 weeks, but I was too busy last night. So I'm doing it tonight instead. But anyway, as you are presumably aware, certainly if you're watching my show, I would assume that's the case. There was an invasion of southwestern Israel from the Gaza Strip by Palestinian combatants associated with Hamas and other militias based in the Gaza Strip, which is a tiny strip of land about 20 miles by 5 miles, something along those lines. Feel free to convert into kilometers if you use the metric system. And crammed into that tiny space are more than 2 million people. I've heard various estimates from 2.1 to 2.3 million is the current population of the Gaza Strip. But anyway, so tens of thousands of armed combatants using drones and various, not hugely advanced missiles of various sorts, and the usual weapons that soldiers carry with them, motorized gliders to get in across the border quickly, and so forth. Hamas and its allies launched a military strike that was targeted primarily at Israeli military bases. And in the course of the battle with the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, quite a few civilians were killed. It's not completely clear who is responsible for how much of those hundreds of civilians that were killed. And certainly there were hundreds of troops that were killed on both sides as well. And if you look at an article in Haaretz, the Israeli newspaper, it lists names of a portion of the known casualties on the Israeli side. And by my count the other day, 170 or so of the ones that were listed were military, another 40 or so were police and security forces, and around 100, I think, just under 100 were civilians. So, anyway, just yesterday, I got an article published talking about the sort of propaganda tactics that were employed by Israel and its allies to basically demonize both the militant, armed fighters and the Palestinian people as a whole, using allegations that Hamas deliberately massacred a large number of civilians and engaged in mass rape at a music festival located near one of the military bases that the rebellion attacked. So, in this article, I took a look at the nature of those allegations and the evidence for them, and showed how they were used in order to demonize Palestinians, basically. So I'm not going to go through that just yet, because first I wanted to read a statement made by the Green Party about the conflict and uh, engage in a bit of critique of it, both pointing out uh, the positives in the statement and also criticizing some aspects of it. So So there's my article. As I said, I'll you know, summarize the main points of it in a little while. I got it published on a uh, Substack site blog called Savage Minds, and many thanks to the chief editor of that publication, Julian Vigo, I think is how you say his last name, Vigo. Correct me if I'm wrong and you're listening, Julian. Um, Although I know it's very late where you are, so I frankly was surprised when you told me you plan to watch. But anyway, so there's one of many images of the destruction that was inflicted on Gaza City, the largest population center in the Gaza Strip. But anyway, so just to skim through this, on the 7th of October, which was Saturday a week ago, a surprise attack on the Israeli military was launched by Hamas and other militias based in Gaza in protest of the essential imprisonment of 2.1 million Palestinians in the small patch of land known as the Gaza Strip, and also the continuing attacks on Palestinians by settlers in the West Bank and East Jerusalem, in particular attacks on worshippers in the Al Aqsa Mosque in East Jerusalem. And the military operation was named, actually, Al Aqsa Flood, by those involved. And the Israeli response so far, in addition to the response that took place in Israel itself, where after this attack completely took the Israeli military, the IDF, by surprise and succeeded in taking over several military bases and settlements. near the border between Israel and Gaza, along which, by the way, there's this massive wall or fence that extends its entire length. So nobody can get in or out. You have to get special permission from the Israeli government if you're a resident of Gaza just to get out of this tiny strip of land. Is basically a 2.1 million person open air prison or concentration camp or refugee camp or whatever you want to call it that you can't leave. So anyway, the Israeli response, in addition to regaining control of the military bases and so forth on the border region, has involved not only the indiscriminate bombardment of neighborhoods in Gaza, primarily in Gaza City, but throughout the Gaza Strip. At the time I wrote this, just a couple of days ago, had killed 2,200 estimated, but it's killing 400 or 500 people a day. So that's over 3,000 by now that we know of. And, moreover, there's been a strict blockade imposed by Israel. There already was a blockade where supplies of essential things like food were limited, but now they have totally cut the electricity to Gaza, stopped shipments of fuel, stopped shipments of food, stopped shipments of water. So, it's not just the bombardment that's a problem, but people are running out of food and water. So, this is a horrible humanitarian catastrophe. And you can see the effects of the bombing there. But anyway, there's also been a propaganda offensive in which the Palestinian resistance is accused of atrocities against civilians that in some cases have been committed, but in some cases there's no evidence that they have been, and I'll get into that later. And again, that's not to say that war crimes against civilians haven't been committed on the Palestinian side, because there's evidence from human rights groups and other sources that both sides have committed them during the past 9 or 10 days. But allegations of war crimes by these Palestinian combatants have been weaponized to derogate Palestinians as a whole. But allegations of war crimes aren't used in that way if the war crimes are committed by Israelis. So anyway, let me go to this Green Party statement now. So this was a statement that the Green Party issued on, oh gosh, it doesn't say, a couple of days ago. Green Party condemns attacks on civilians in Israel and Gaza, calls for immediate ceasefire. Oh, damn it. Sorry about that. Okay, I'll leave it open so I can keep up with any comments that come through, but obviously I don't want it playing. Okay, Green Party condemns attacks on civilians in Israel and Gaza, calls for immediate ceasefire. Okay, so that's the headline, which, yes, Green Party should condemn attacks on civilians, both Israeli civilians and Palestinian civilians, by both the Palestinian side and the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces. But should that be the main emphasis of the statement? Well, I'll get back to that. Let's read it. The Green Party of the United States condemns the targeted attacks on civilians in the recent wave of violence in Gaza and Israel. We call for an immediate ceasefire, an immediate end to the invasion and occupation of Gaza, and a halt to all military and foreign aid to Israel. We urge our government to join with the UN to secure Israel's complete withdrawal to at least the 1967 boundaries in compliance with international law. Hamas and Israel are deliberately targeting civilian populations in violation of the Geneva Conventions and the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court, which forbid targeting civilians and civilian objects, such as homes, places of worship, and medical facilities, as well as hostage taking. The increased oppression of Palestinians under the Netanyahu government has become even more heinous, with Israel now cutting off electricity and the delivery of food, water, and fuel to the Gaza Strip, a violation of international humanitarian law prohibiting sieges on civilian populations. We urge all parties to cease attacks on civilians immediately, said Joseph Nahum, I'm not sure how you say his last name, National Party co-chair. Only a just and lasting peace based on the right of self-determination for both Israelis and Palestinians can break this cycle and bring peace to the region. This peace must include the right of return for Palestinian refugees, the dismantling of illegal settlements, and the establishment of a just and equitable society where all people have equal rights and opportunities, added Nahum. So, yeah, all in all, I think it's not a bad statement. It certainly makes the right points, I think, regarding neither side deliberately targeting civilian populations, Israel ending the horrific siege of the Gaza Strip, and Palestinians having the right to determine their own form of government, which Israelis already have, by the way, at least if they're Jewish. There are Arab residents of Israel, but they don't necessarily have full citizenship rights. Talks about Palestinian refugees having the right to move back to Palestine, dismantling illegal settlements, establishing a just and equitable society where all people have equal rights and opportunities. Fine not to spell out the details here, I guess, but I guess the difficulty I have with this is just the way it starts out, and the emphasis is on this sort of both sidesism, where the focus is on attacks on civilians and condemning that, and moreover saying they're targeted attacks, which isn't necessarily the case with all of these civilian deaths that have occurred. So, what do I mean by that? And well, I don't think you can argue. There's no argument that where did it go? There's no argument that this is deliberate targeting of civilians, but there's eyewitness accounts that make it pretty clear that the main thing that happened during this battle that took place on Saturday, October 7th, and maybe ran over into the next day, I'm not sure, in general was not an attempt to target civilians, but on both sides was primarily focused on military targets, with Israel mainly focusing on trying to subdue the troops that had invaded Israel, and those troops in turn focusing their efforts on capturing military bases, capturing settlements, and so forth. So this idea that somebody proposed that the main thrust of the Palestinian incursion was to line civilians up and shoot them, or mass rapes or whatever. The evidence doesn't support that. even though the evidence also supports that both sides killed civilians, some of them deliberately. So the Electronic Intifada, which is a site that I really like for its analysis of the Israeli-Palestine conflict, I highly recommend it. Ali Abu Nima is the uh, founder and chief executive of this publication. And he and his colleague David Sheen published an article the other day titled Israeli Forces Shot Their Own Civilians, Kibbutz Survivor Says. So this woman, Yasmin Porat, who was on a kibbutz called Kibbutz Be'eri near the border with Gaza, says that many Israeli civilians were killed by Israeli forces, and also by Palestinian forces, because there was a gun battle and battle in general between the Israeli and Palestinian forces, where civilians kind of got caught in the middle, and there were hostages taken by the Palestinian side, which they planned to use as leverage. Approximately, maybe something like 150 hostages were taken. The vast majority of them military, prisoners of war, in other words, taken back to Gaza, and an attempt has been made to use them as bargaining chips to, attain the release of approximately 5,000, mostly civilian Palestinians, that Israel had detained. In other words, Israel kidnapped people too. And people don't talk about that. But anyway, so Yasmin Porat says that Israeli civilians were undoubtedly killed by their own security forces. It happened when Israeli forces engaged in fierce gun battles with Palestinian fighters in Kibbutz Be'eri and fired indiscriminately at both the fighters and their Israeli prisoners. So they're just shooting at Palestinians who have Israeli prisoners without taking into account, we're killing people on our side too if we do this. They eliminated everyone, including the hostages, she told Israeli radio. There was very, very heavy crossfire and even tank shelling, obviously by the Israeli side, because Hamas doesn't have any tanks at this point. The woman, 44-year-old Yasmin Porat, said that prior to that, she and other civilians had been held by the Palestinians for several hours and treated humanely, she said. She had fled the nearby Nova Rave. I guess that's the music festival that everyone's been talking about, from which many people fled, obviously panicked when the fighting broke out, and they couldn't just drive away because the roads were blockaded by the Israeli military. So they made a run for it, and some of them were captured. So she was interviewed on an Israeli radio program, and the interview, as hardly surprisingly, was ultimately censored by the radio station. But fortunately, a recording of it was preserved and translated by Electronic Intifada. Anyway, so that's the main point that I wanted to get across about what she said, was that this notion that it was simply terrorists massacring Israeli civilians on the Palestinian side doesn't reflect what some of the eyewitnesses reported. And notice how Israeli troops and security forces never get called terrorists, even though they commit all of the same acts, killing of civilians, sometimes deliberately, kidnapping people, and so on and so on, that the Palestinian side does. So, I guess my general reaction to the Green Party's statement is, uh, it's not a bad statement. It makes a lot of the right points about what needs to happen in the future, and strongly pushes for a just settlement of the conflict. But the title and the first part of it puts all the emphasis on simply condemning attacks on civilians by both sides rather than centering the central fact of this situation, which is that uh, Israel is a colonizing state, a colonial power that is uh, engaged in yeah, military occupation and ethnic cleansing and genocide against the Palestinian people. I think that needs to be front and center. And notice how this statement doesn't even, you know, use these terms to refer to what's happening. It doesn't call it apartheid, even though every major human rights group, even in the West, which they're hardly you know, like bias toward the Palestinians, has called Israel an apartheid state, and um, so on and so forth. So, I guess that's my take on that. So, now I'd like to get to talking about. Let's see. Anybody commented? No, not so far. My article that I published, or that Julian published on Savage Minds, a couple of days ago, and you summarize the main points, and then um, you talk about some of the reactions that I got from people, most of whom seem to be sort of you know, mindlessly supportive, to be honest, of the Israeli government. Okay, so atrocity propaganda, mass rape allegations, and also other allegations, weaponized to demonize Palestinians. Okay, I read you all this first. So to begin with, just briefly, what I did was summarize the historical context that led up to this uh, massive escalation of the conflict over the last 10 days. And I got a lot of the details of this summary. I mean, not that I haven't read or watched many, many other things before on the history of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, but most of the sort of bullet point type information that I gave here came from a great little half-hour summary video by Abby Martin, the journalist or the main journalist behind the Empire Files. And it's sort of an introduction to a documentary that she and her colleagues put together called Gaza Fights for Freedom, which is also very much to be recommended. But anyway, so a brief history of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. So well before Israel was founded in 1948, and a lot of people don't know this because they assume this all started with Jews fleeing from the Nazi Holocaust. But many decades before that, there was conflict between Jews who settled in Palestine and its native Arab inhabitants. So, well before World War II even started, about 30% of the inhabitants of the region that is referred to as Palestine were European Jewish settlers or immigrants. And what's at the heart of the conflict that we see going on now was exactly the same in the early 1900s when European Jews began immigrating to Palestine. Many settlers who moved there from Europe didn't just want to live there; they wanted to ethnically cleanse the land of Arabs. They wanted Palestinians to not live in Palestine anymore. And The predictable result of this, because much the same thing happened in, North America, what's now the United States and Canada, many decades before uh, these events in Palestine. The result was violent conflict between the settlers and the native Arab inhabitants that continues up until today. And just as in the U.S. and Canada, the vastly greater military might of the European colonizers has meant a steady shrinkage in the amount of land allotted to the natives. So you can see here, um, going from left to right, in 1947, 1 year prior to the founding of Israel, the vast majority of the land of Palestine was inhabited by Palestinians. And just those white dots you see there were Jewish settlements. However, as I said, there were lots of Jewish people living in those settlements, and they wanted more land. And the next year they got it. So next image there is the partition plan proposed by the United Nations, which was implemented. And so you can see they vastly shrunk the Palestinian territory. So they wound up with only 40% or so of the land, the green there, and Israel got the rest, about 60%. Well, it's more like 45, 55, I guess. But anyway, the other thing you should notice about the way the land was divided was that uh, Israel has basically continuous uh, a continuous stretch of land, whereas Palestinian land is much more fragmented. And now we move to um, what happened after the what's called the NAFCA, the civil war that took place in 1948, where uh, about 800,000 Palestinians were forced off of their land, and there were just massive massacres, tens of thousands of people killed. So you could call that genocide. So you can see there, Palestinians are left with roughly 20% of the land. I think it was 22%, and there's a big separation there between the only two territories they have left. The West Bank, there in green, to the left of the Jordan River, on the west bank of the Jordan River, and then a much smaller Gaza Strip over here. And here's what it looks like today. There's still the Gaza Strip, but most of the land that was the West Bank has now, Palestinians have been pushed out, and it now consists of Jewish settlements. And the Israeli regime has been described as an apartheid state by several human rights organizations, and what's included in that has been the fragmentation and shrinking of the land that I just showed you, theft of resources such as water, denial of Palestinian citizenship in Israel, like Palestinians don't have a state at all, economic oppression such as the blockade of Gaza, destruction of crops, etc., military checkpoints, and just massive systematic violence and repression in an effort to maintain the iron grip of Israel on the Palestinians. And over time, part and parcel of any system of oppression, like Israeli apartheid or South African apartheid or slavery in the United States or Jim Crow, whatever, is demonization of the oppressed population. So in the case of Palestine, you're calling them terrorists or various terms depicting them as subhuman, whereas Jews are portrayed as the chosen people, and so on. Okay, so uh, and I talked about this last week. There was a mass rape allegation made against Hamas and allied fighters. It was alleged that they raped several Israeli women at a music festival near the Reem military base, where was lots of fighting. And a conservative U.S. Jewish publication called Tablet magazine published an article where this claim was first made. And here's how the article described this incident. They said, I saw videos with a male getting held by a group of Arab kids, like they're 16, 17. They're kids, but they're young men already, and they're holding this guy, and he looks at his girlfriend being mounted on a bike and driven away from him. So whoever this is talking about people being kidnapped. God knows what she's going to experience. Women have been raped at the area of the rave next to their friends' bodies, dead bodies. That's it. That's the only thing that's said here. So the extent of the rape allegation is this unidentified person, simply identified as one survivor, who says simply women have been raped. And several of these rape victims appear to have been executed. He or she goes on to say, but well, no, actually, I guess the author said that, but doesn't explain in what sense they appear to have been executed, as opposed to they appear to be dead for whatever reason, maybe caught in the crossfire or what have you. It certainly isn't made clear in this article how there were these dead bodies. And it's really hard to imagine a rape allegation that's more vague or lacking in detail. All it says is women have been raped. Typically with rape allegations, we have a woman, accusing some man of raping her. And so, we have this mantra, believe women, but there's no woman here. And the lack of any information about this person, such as, for example, whether they were male or female, whether they themselves were a victim of rape, it just seems kind of odd. And so this article went viral on social media. American actress Amy Schumer talked about this article with her 13 million Instagram followers. There was an account of the alleged incident in the Times of Israel, an Israeli newspaper, where basically they said that sexual assault was suspected because there was a woman who was wearing either a bikini or her underwear, and was in appeared to be in bad shape because of wounds from being wounded in the battle, apparently, as far as we know. And then another woman had blood on her shorts. Now this is hardly the kind of detailed evidence that you would associate with a rape allegation. Nonetheless, the claim went viral on social media. It's still being bandied about, but the Los Angeles Times retracted their report of the alleged rape. They said an earlier version of this column mentioned rape in the attacks, but such reports have not been substantiated. In addition, the Israeli military, the IDF, also said that they couldn't confirm that there was any evidence that any rape occurred. So this article in Forward, which is a liberal Jewish publication here in the United States in New York, says Biden, Netanyahu, celebrities, and columnists have rushed to condemn rape, but the IDF does not yet have any evidence that it happened. Okay, so I mean, they talked to a spokesperson for the IDF, and were told, "Hey, we don't know if this happened. We don't have any evidence for it." Now, again, mind you, uh, we have credible evidence that civilians were killed, and that, um, in all likelihood, both sides were responsible for those deaths. So there's a report by the human rights organization Human Rights Watch, and various media articles quote eyewitnesses, um, who say many people were killed who were not soldiers. And an article in Haaretz, as I mentioned earlier, listed the names of them. And although the majority were uh, of names they listed were military personnel, quite a few of them were civilians. So, um, you know, my point in this article, and that I'm making here tonight, and I've been making over and over, is I'm not saying that there weren't, you know, um, war crimes committed by Palestinian as well as Israeli troops. I'm not saying that at all. I think that the evidence suggests that they did on both sides, and certainly, especially to the extent that they were deliberate, which certainly the bombing of Gaza is. Certainly, if there were any executions of hostages, or shootings of hostages in any way that, or of civilians in any way that, you know uh, hadn't hadn't attacked anybody or anything like that, that should obviously be condemned, regardless of who the perpetrator or the victim are. My point is just that, regardless of whether or not the rape allegations are true, they've served as weapons in this propaganda campaign to demonize Palestinians and make harm done to them politically palatable to Western audiences, including feminists, who obviously would be generally sympathetic to rape claims. Another claim that went viral, um, which was first made by an Israeli soldier to a reporter for an Israeli TV station, and then was picked up by the Netanyahu government, the Israeli government, and by U.S. President Joe Biden. The claim was that 40 infants were killed, many of them supposedly beheaded, and as that claim sort of ping-ponged around on social media, it quickly was converted into 40 infants were beheaded. But shortly after Biden's statement, and all these claims that were pinballing around on uh, in social media and the media, both the Israeli military and the White House said that the claim couldn't be confirmed. So so far there just hasn't been any evidence compellingly demonstrating that these incidents occurred. And we have to remember that this, what I've termed, and other people have termed as well, atrocity propaganda, where allegations of atrocities that are, at least not at the time, backed up by solid evidence, are used to demonize some group of people. That's nothing new. It's happened in the past. So if it turns out that these allegations that I just mentioned are false, or if they remain unconfirmed, there's two of many examples of that sort of propaganda. So back before the first Iraq War in the 1990s, it was falsely claimed by the Kuwaiti ambassador's daughter, Naira Al Saba, I think is how you say her name. That Iraqi soldiers were pulling Kuwaiti babies out of incubators and killing them in hospitals. No evidence that happened. And then recently, during the Syrian civil war, it was falsely claimed that Syria had used chemical weapons, even though weapons inspectors had previously verified that Syria no longer had any, and they were not able to find evidence that Syria had used these weapons, which obviously they didn't have to use as far as anybody knew. And these recent allegations against Hamas are not the first time evidence-free rape allegations have been used as propaganda tools before either. So in 2011, just prior to the NATO-led overthrow of the Gaddafi government in Libya, it was claimed that Libyan troops had been given Viagra and told, go rape women. And amazingly enough, the exact same claim was recently kind of recycled by Western officials during the Ukraine war. Russia was accused of giving its troops Viagra and encouraging them to go rape women. Now, again, real atrocities occur all the time during wartime or armed rebellions, even on the part of forces fighting against evil institutions like apartheid or fascism or slavery. So, of course, one of the worst examples of atrocities committed by groups of combatants who were fighting against regimes we could all agree were evil was in World War II. Allied military forces committed a lot of atrocities against Germany, Japan, and so forth, the Axis fascist powers. Most infamously, the firebombing of German and Japanese cities and the dropping of atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Then go back another century, and you have slave rebellions breaking out around the Deep South, as well as in Haiti, which actually was the only nation in the Western Hemisphere where a slave-holding regime or government was overthrown completely. There were slave rebellions where mass murders of entire slave owner families took place. So men, women, and children. Okay, do you condemn that? Should I condemn that? Yeah, sure, I condemn that. But, stepping back a bit and looking at the broader context, slavery is wrong. Virtually no one would argue today that the occurrence of these atrocities in the struggle to overthrow slavery, or later on the struggle to overthrow German and Japanese Italian fascism, the occurrence of these atrocities doesn't mean that the struggle to end these systems of oppression was wrong, or that we should just throw up our hands and say, both sides are bad, they both commit atrocities against civilians. Well, yes, they do. In most cases, both commit atrocities in civilians. That doesn't mean that the struggle, that the side fighting against apartheid or fascism or slavery, Jim Crow, whatever it is unjust. It just means that there's no such thing as perfect victims, generally speaking. Oppressed people are human beings, and oppressors are not the only ones who do things wrong. So, likewise, neither real nor invented atrocities by the Palestinian side should cause those who care about justice to abandon support for Palestinians' freedom. We can condemn documented atrocities against innocents that occur without adopting a both sides are bad perspective. Okay, last week I spent a lot of time going through examples of various feminists who kind of bought into the propaganda campaign. So I won't do that again. I'll just say, I was really taken aback, even though it wasn't entirely surprising that this happened to an extent. I was really taken aback by the extent to which women's rights activists uncritically accepted the claims that I was just talking about mass rape and baby beheadings, and even solidly supported Israel and expressed no sympathy whatsoever with the longstanding oppression of Palestinians by Israel. perfect example of this, unfortunately, because I love her books and think that she's basically a very well-meaning person. Was J.K. Rowling. So she said, "Let the sniveling apologist for rape, murder, and torture explain how this too was justified." And then she talks about the 40 babies story. Um, and so our caption here, Julian put this, was J.K. Rowling is one of many feminists who uncritically accepted unconfirmed media and social media reports. And just today, she said, "Kidnapping children is despicable and wholly unjustifiable for obvious reasons. This picture has hit home with me, and it's a picture of a kidnapped 12-year-old girl. But as I said to her, JK, kidnapping is wrong regardless of who does it. And it isn't just Palestinians that kidnapped Israelis. There's several thousand, basically political prisoners in Israeli jails, Palestinians who have committed no crime, but were just, picked up off the streets and thrown in jail, in many cases tortured, raped, etc. So how about condemning them too? Condemn them both, because it's wrong regardless of who does it. Oh, I forgot to share this with you. So there it is. And quite a few of the feminists who push this narrative of the beheaded babies and the mass rape that I suppose certainly could be true, but at this point there's no solid evidence to support those specific incidents having happened. Some of the women who and some men who are women's rights advocates as well have even misrepresented protests in support of Palestinian struggles for liberation. The same sort of protests that I've been going to since the 1980s, when I first became a political activist, and we were protesting against the Israeli occupation of Palestine back then. But these protests have been framed as celebrations of rape or the killing of civilians by Hamas, rather than protests in support of the uprising that, for the first time in a long time, caused serious trouble for the Israeli occupation. And I say ironically because in the process of condemning the mass protests against Israel, bombing Gaza and imposing a draconian siege on it as well, they're forgetting that if, for example, they advocate for the preservation of female-only spaces, such as locker rooms or women's shelters or women's sports, they get called names too, or misrepresented as supporting horrible things too. You're called bigots and fascists and Nazis and stuff like that, just simply for saying, a women's swim team shouldn't have males on it who say that they identify as females because they have a physical advantage. It's not fair. And for saying that, people get called bigots or far right or fascists or Nazis, even though that's the majority opinion. But hypocrisy here. You can't criticize people protesting one injustice in that way when you yourself have been on the receiving end of similar gaslighting for simply saying, hey, a rape shelter should provide space for women to talk about their victimization amongst themselves. Some of the folks doing this have argued that the protesters protesting for Palestinian liberation and against the Israeli occupation and bombing of Gaza and so forth should be fired from their jobs or censored off of social media, prohibited from expressing their opinion, which is exactly the same fate that women, feminists themselves, have suffered in recent years. I personally have an acquaintance who was fired from her job simply for saying that when Roe versus Wade was about to get overturned, that reproductive rights are an issue for females and it should be talked about in those terms. And meanwhile, folks who are banning about these allegations don't even really, in the vast majority of cases, talk about well-documented Israeli human rights violations, such as the rape of Palestinian women by Israeli soldiers or in Israeli prisons and so forth. And some even justify, the bombing of Gaza or the blockade of Gaza, saying Palestinians hate Jews or they deserve whatever's coming to them because they elected Hamas as their government. Never mind that the majority of the population of Gaza is under 18 years old and couldn't have elected Hamas because they weren't born yet when Hamas was elected. And moreover, most of the remainder were too young to vote at the time because Gaza, as I just said, has a very young population. So basically, it really did come as a shock to me that these opinions were expressed to this extent by a group of people who are very concerned about the issue of women's rights and just this obliviousness to what's really going on with this other issue. But even people who are highly informed about certain issues with their own society, such as the problem of sexual assault and domestic violence, aren't necessarily, and in fact, typically are not well informed about foreign affairs. For instance, most Americans can't find Ukraine on a map. And so when you have this sort of tunnel vision where you don't know much of anything about issue X, like Palestine and the Israeli occupation, into this vacuum can come false claims or biased perspectives that are pervasive within corporate media and social media echo chambers. So we've seen this before back in 2002, 2003, because this is all they heard. Just over and over, Iraq has weapons of mass destruction. Iraq has weapons of mass destruction. Iraq has weapons of mass destruction, which social psychology experiments have found that the more frequently false claims are repeated, other things being equal, the more likely they are to be believed to be true. The validity effect or illusory truth effect, it's called. And so, this worked in the field, so to speak, too. More than 90% of Americans polled in late 2002 believed that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction, even though it was simply a repetition of this claim with no evidence provided. And, unfortunately, it still works. So, a poll out just the other day said that 70% of Americans think that Israel's ethnic cleansing of Gaza is justified in response to Hamas's attack. So, in other words, 70% of Americans believe that, as a result of actual or invented harm done to civilians was propagated throughout the media, in their minds, 70% of in the minds of 70% of Americans, suffice to justify a scale of murder through bombs and through starving people that when you look at what the population of Gaza is, it's comparable in scale to the number of lives lost in the United States to COVID during the pandemic. So, let's say 4,000 people have died so far from the bombing and starvation campaign enacted by Israel against Gaza. So that's out of about 2 million people. The population of the U.S. is about 330 million. So you're talking, if Gaza was the size of the United States, you'd be talking about more than 500,000 people dead in the United States in, a little over a week. I'll say that again. More than 500,000 people dead in the course of a little over a week. If what Israel was doing to Gaza was instead being done to the United States, that's the scale of it. Just horrific. And of course, the COVID pandemic has gone on for over 3 years in order to reach approximately 1.2 million deaths from COVID. This is not even yet 10 days. Started on a Saturday morning, October 7th. It's now Monday night here in the United States, Monday a week later. So 9.5 days later. Just incredible. Okay, so let's see how I'm doing on time here. Okay, I'm gonna wrap up here with a look at some of the comments that were made on my piece, and a lot of them, to be honest, were just kind of absurd. But you have to understand, not only is there this repetition over and over and over and over again of undocumented allegations, as well as some true allegations, perhaps. That not only does this result in just sort of this lack of empathy toward a group of people that these things are being said about. So, Iraq has weapons of mass destruction. Saddam Hussein is Hitler. Saddam Hussein is Hitler. By the way, did I tell you that Iraq has weapons of mass destruction? By the way, did I tell you that Iraq is connected with Al Qaeda, who committed 9/11? Just endless repetition of such claims resulted ultimately in that case in demonization and lack of empathy for the Iraqi people. And similarly, these kinds of claims made about Palestinians and constantly calling Palestinian soldiers terrorists, but never describing Israeli military forces that way. Referring to Palestinians, or at least Hamas or whatever, with dehumanizing terms like Nazis or animals, and just biased language where, for example, you refer to the killing of Israelis by Palestinians as just killing, but you say about Palestinians who have been murdered by IDF forces, you describe that as people have died in Gaza. That's actually been a description that's been, a double standard that's been applied. So Alan McLeod, who writes for Mint Press News, says, quotes from the BBC: more than 500 people have died in Gaza after Israel launched massive retaliatory airstrikes, according to Gaza's health ministry. And I haven't checked the figures the last few hours, but I'm sure the Gaza Health Ministry figures are well over 3,000 dead from the bombing and from other causes at this point. But more than 700 people, they say, have been killed in Israel since Hamas launched its attacks on Saturday. So yes, they were killed, but you didn't say Gazans were killed. You said they died, which kind of removes the agent who caused them to die from the equation. Israeli defense forces and the Israeli government are absolved of blame in this framing. So we really have to be aware of and fight against this attempt to brainwash us and gaslight us, basically. If you have enough time, you really have a moral duty to be on the lookout for biases and seek out and carefully consider information about important political issues like the Israeli-Palestinian conflict if you're gonna express strong opinions about it. And if you're not willing to do that, just do everyone a favor and shut the fuck up, because if you haven't done your due diligence, it's almost inevitable that your reading of the issues is going to be incorrect, and you may inadvertently contribute to a political climate that encourages harm to innocent people. So, it really behooves us all to have a little more humility about our knowledge of world events, such as the 75-year-old Israeli occupation in Palestine. Okay, so let's look at some of these comments. I am unsubscribing and will not support savage minds any longer, says this very angry person, and goes on to say somehow the history of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is irrelevant to what happened this past week, as if what happened this past week isn't basically a replay of what's been going on for 75 years. You're normalizing barbarism. Hamas and the Israeli government do want to keep fighting, yes. The people of both sides are victims, yes. But this is superficial and biased and probably not all true. So Julian, the editor, responded to her, why do you only support free speech you agree with? The LA Times retracted their essay. He's talking about the portion of their essay that referred to the rape allegations because many journalists have been raising alarms at the shoddy reporting, quote unquote, on this issue. How is this piece normalizing barbarism? What a word to use for an article that you admit is biased and probably not all true. You've guessed your way through a critique that has already been admitted as unsubstantiated. Okay, this person claims that I'm denying war crimes committed by Palestinians. I've just summarized and actually read most of the essay to you. And where did I do that, Matt Osborne? Where did I do that? This is just either you didn't read it or you're just being dishonest. So I said, you're missing the point, because my point isn't, trying to figure out whether or not the rape allegations are true or whether or not the beheading allegations are true or whatever. My point is that these allegations are being weaponized in order to demonize Palestinians and make harm done to them politically palatable to Western audiences. So he keeps arguing that I'm being denialist by not simply, acknowledging that they're true, even though there's at so far not solid evidence that they're true. So I said in response to more of the same bullshit, what you got from this piece and what it actually said are very different things. I acknowledged in the piece that there was good evidence that war crimes were committed by the Palestinian side. And I don't know how you can look at the image at the top of the page, the picture of just the desolation or decimation, you could say, of downtown Gaza City by Israeli bombs, knowing full well only the IDF could have done that. And obviously, Hamas didn't do it to their own population, and they don't have the military capacity to engage in carpet bombing. And knowing full well that the Israeli government said they were going to do exactly what they did to Gaza, cut off supplies of food and water and electricity and fuel, carpet bomb, Gaza, and obviously overwhelmingly those 2.1 million or whatever it is people in Gaza aren't part of Hamas. So even if we decide, oh, Hamas is 100% bad, what about all those other innocent people that are getting harmed? So, he says, I'm dismissing the rape allegations, but, I just point out, well, I'm dismissing them at this time because there's not yet compelling evidence of them. So I said, #BelieveWomen doesn't mean uncritically accept all rape allegations. It means take women's allegations of rape seriously and evaluate them on their merits. But as in the rape allegations against Julian Assange, made only by the Swedish government, not by any Swedish women, there aren't even any women making rape allegations against Hamas combatants so far. If that occurs, then I'll take them seriously, just as I take seriously evidence that Hamas and allies, as well as the IDF, to say nothing of Israeli settlers, have killed civilians. Okay, so, I mean, it's a lot more of the same sorts of just very sort of disingenuous allegations that I'm ignoring the very possibility that, in this case, Palestinians who've taken up arms against the Israeli occupation, that I'm somehow denying that they're capable of doing bad things. And as certainly my listeners know, is not the case. And as I told this fellow here, I talk about, any harm done to innocent people that's well documented. That doesn't mean that I have to pretend that allegations that are not well documented have merit that they thus far have not been proven to have. Okay, well, like I said, it's kind of more of the same. So I guess I'll stop there. And I hope what I've said has been informative and I haven't repeated myself too much from last week. But I just wanted to give you an update on the situation in Palestine, as well as the kind of kind of mass hysteria that has taken place. That really is very reminiscent. It feels like to the political climate that existed here in the United States in the early 2000s after the September 11th, 2001 terrorist attacks, where really, Muslims in general, as well as anybody who even looked like they could possibly be Muslim, such as Sikhs, were demonized and sometimes, physically attacked. Same thing's happening now. Anybody who protests the Israeli occupation of Palestine is demonized as a terrorist sympathizer or this kind of bullshit. And it It's probably going to lead to violence and already has. I don't have the link handy, but there was just an incident in Chicago reported yesterday, I believe, where some lunatic broke into a Palestinian, I believe, or just generally some other Muslim, which, I mean, not all Palestinians are Muslims, by the way, in case you don't know. This guy broke into their apartment, and attacked the family with a knife, murdered a 6-year-old boy, and badly wounded his mother. Just crazy. And it arises from this atmosphere of hatred that's being manufactured by the Israeli as well as Western governments and media outlets to pave the way for what, if it isn't already appropriate to call it genocide, and I think it is, certainly it will be if this continues, if there continue to be cutoffs of food and water, way more than 4,000 people are going to die. And as you've probably heard, the Israeli government is demanding that Palestinians who live in the northern half of Gaza should leave, should flee to the south, and get out of Gaza entirely if they can. Even though currently the border with Egypt is blocked, and of course the border with Israel is blocked. They don't want them in Israel, certainly, and they have nowhere to go. They're being pushed off their land, just like in 1948, when 800,000 Palestinians were brutally attacked and forced off their land, which the Israeli occupiers proceeded to steal. And they're trying to do the same thing in Gaza. And these yahoos, like the people who attacked me for my article, or this idiot who violently attacked a Palestinian family, they don't care about the well-being of the Palestinian people. They're really hardly even human to them, and that's really sad, and it's really scary. Okay. I hope this has been informative for you, and again, my Substack blog is jeffmelton.substack.com, and the article that I was showing you was published on the Substack blog called Savage Minds, and I will link to it, or have linked to it actually, in the video description, so please check it out. Please, if you can afford it, you need to help me pursue this work on a regular basis, as I have been trying to do. Help me out with a Substack donation, and please like and share this video, and subscribe to the channel, subscribe to my Substack page if you haven't already. All right, well, peace, everybody, and I really mean that. I hope that we don't wind up in like a world war or something. And I will see you next time.